Brokeback Mountain wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural earthquake. Released in 2005, it reshaped the conversation around queer love on screen. But beyond its heartbreaking story of Ennis and Jack, there are dozens of hidden details, behind-the-scenes choices, and cultural facts that many viewers miss. Here are 20 gay facts you probably didn't know about Brokeback Mountain. 1. It was almost a low-budget indie. Before Ang Lee took it on, Brokeback Mountain spent years in development hell. At one point in the late 90s, it was considered for production as a tiny independent film with unknown actors. Hollywood studios were hesitant to finance a queer cowboy love story, fearing controversy and poor box office returns. The fact that it eventually became a prestige film, winning Oscars and grossing over $178 million worldwide, shows just how much it defied those early doubts. 2. Heath Ledger refused to parody the kiss. At the 2007 Academy Awards, host Ellen DeGeneres joked about recreating the Brokeback kiss on stage. Ledger, however, flatly refused to make light of it. He believed the relationship between Jack and Ennis deserved respect and authenticity, not cheap comedy. His refusal became legendary, highlighting Ledger's deep commitment to portraying queer love with dignity. It also reinforced why his performance remained so powerful. He approached Ennis as a real man, not a caricature. 3. Gustavo Santaolall's music became a queer anthem. The haunting guitar theme that runs throughout the film, written by Argentine composer Gustavo Santaolalla, won an Academy Award and became instantly iconic. What many don't realize is that Santaolalla deliberately composed it with sparse notes to echo the silences between Ennis and Jack. The melody, often played with just 2 or 3 notes at a time, mirrors the unspoken emotions of queer love constrained by fear. To this day, queer audiences recognize the score as one of cinema's most haunting love themes. 4. It sparked a Hollywood panic called gay cowboy movie. When Brokeback Mountain hit theaters, critics coined the phrase the gay cowboy movie, and it became a kind of cultural shorthand. Some studio executives feared it would harm the careers of its stars, and conservative commentators attacked it as Hollywood propaganda. But the label backfired. Instead of dismissing the film, the phrase made it iconic. The idea that 2 rugged American archetypes, cowboys, challenging the mythology of masculinity at the heart of US culture. 5. Ang Lee nearly turned it down. Despite his reputation for emotional storytelling, Ang Lee hesitated before directing Brokeback Mountain. He worried he couldn't do justice to Annie Proulx's short story and questioned whether a queer cowboy love story would find an audience. Ultimately, he was persuaded by the raw humanity of the script. Lee later said that what drew him in was not just the sexuality, but the tragedy of love constrained by time, place, and fear. His decision changed film history, proving that queer stories could be told with tenderness and mainstream acclaim. 6. Jake Gyllenhaal called it like playing a war hero. When Jake Gyllenhaal was asked how he understood Jack Twist, his answer was surprising. He said he thought of Jack not just as a ranch hand or rodeo cowboy, but as someone living under constant threat, almost like a soldier in wartime. For Jack, the battle wasn't fought with guns, but with secrecy. Every time he kissed Ennis, every time he suggested they build a life together, he was risking exposure. In interviews, Gyllenhaal compared Jack's courage to that of a war hero, someone who chooses to face danger in pursuit of something bigger than himself. He believed Jack's bravery was in refusing to settle for loneliness, even if society punished him for it. This lens makes Jack's character even more moving. He isn't reckless, he's heroic. He dreams of a life that seems impossible, but still dares to reach for it. This framing resonated with many queer viewers who know what it's like to love in hostile environments. For them, Jack's persistence felt like a kind of resistance, the quiet bravery of demanding happiness in a world that insists you don't deserve it. 7. The original short story was just 30 pages. It's hard to believe that one of the most iconic queer films ever made came from such a small seed. Raw, Annie Proulx's short story, published in The New Yorker in 1997, ran only 30 pages. Yet within that limited space, she captured a lifetime of longing, repression, and heartbreak. The screenplay by Larry McMurtry and Diana Ossana expanded the narrative, fleshing out characters, adding details about Ennis's family life, and deepening Jack's backstory. What makes the adaptation remarkable is how much of the dialogue comes straight from Proulx's pen. Lines like, "I wish I knew how to quit you" were already there, unforgettable, before Hollywood got involved. Ang Lee and his team respected the story's spare language, resisting the temptation to embellish. Instead, they translated silence into cinema, long pauses, sweeping shots of Wyoming landscapes, and wordless expressions between the actors. Many viewers who discover the short story after seeing the film are stunned by how faithfully it preserves the same emotional intensity. 8. Ledger and Gyllenhaal took real risks with the sex scenes. Back in 2005, same-sex intimacy on screen was still rare in mainstream cinema, and Hollywood was notorious for toning down gay romance. Many actors worried that portraying a queer character could damage their careers. That's why Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal's decision to fully commit to the sex scenes was considered daring. Even risky. The infamous tent scene, where Ennis and Jack's pent-up tension explodes into rough, passionate intimacy. Ledger insisted the moment couldn't look like a choreographed Hollywood kiss. He wanted it to feel messy, desperate, like two men starving for touch but terrified of being caught. Gyllenhaal agreed, and together they created one of the most visceral depictions of queer desire ever seen in a mainstream film. This choice carried weight. Both actors were straight, but instead of approaching the roles with hesitation, they leaned in fully, refusing to sanitize queer love. Their bravery opened the door for more honest LQB plus intimacy on screen. For many queer viewers, it was the first time they saw male passion presented without apology. Not as a joke, not as a tragedy in progress, but as love in its fiercest form. 9. It won Best Director, but lost Best Picture. When the Oscars rolled around in 2006, Brokeback Mountain was the clear frontrunner for Best Picture. It had dominated critics' lists, swept major award ceremonies, and won Ang Lee the Best Director prize. Yet, in a stunning upset, the Academy gave Best Picture to Crash, a film that critics now largely regard as heavy-handed and dated. The loss sparked outrage. Many saw it as proof that Hollywood wasn't ready to crown a gay love story as the year's defining film. Even some Academy voters admitted later that they didn't vote for Brokeback because they felt uncomfortable with its subject matter. For queer audiences, the snub felt personal, a reminder that their stories were still being sidelined, no matter how beautifully told. Over the years, Brokeback Mountain has only grown in stature, while Crash has faded into obscurity. Critics regularly rank it among the greatest films of the 21st century, and the Oscar loss is cited as one of the Academy's biggest mistakes. In a way, the controversy only strengthened the film's legacy. It became not just a story about forbidden love, but a real-world example of how society still resists honoring queer narratives. 10. The shirts in the closet became a symbol of gay cinema. Few props in film history have carried the emotional weight of Jack and Ennis's entwined shirts. When Ennis discovers them near the end, Jack's bloodied shirt tucked tenderly inside his own from that first summer. The image captures everything about their relationship. Hidden, bruised, yet bound together. This detail comes directly from Proulx's short story, but the way Ang Lee films it makes it unforgettable. The camera lingers on Ennis's trembling hands, the quiet horror and tenderness on his face as he realizes Jack kept this relic for decades. For Ennis, who spent his life unable to articulate his love, the shirts are proof that Jack always carried him close. After production wrapped, Ang Lee held onto the shirts himself, recognizing their symbolic power. Eventually, they were donated to the Academy Museum, where they remain a pilgrimage site for queer fans. People stand before the glass case in tears, treating the shirts like sacred artifacts. They represent not only Jack and Ennis's love, but the thousands of queer stories hidden in closets, waiting to be remembered. 11th. Heath Ledger's voice. Transformation was intentional. When audiences first heard Heath Ledger as Ennis Del Mar, many were surprised at his voice. Instead of his usual Australian accent or a clear American register, Ledger spoke with a gravelly, constricted tone that sometimes made him hard to understand. This wasn't an accident. Ledger deliberately developed a voice that sounded like it came from deep in Ennis's chest, almost swallowed before it reached the air. The choice reflected Ennis's emotional repression. Ledger wanted Ennis to sound like a man who struggled to speak, not just emotionally, but physically. Every word feels weighed down by years of silence, fear, and internalized shame. His quietness contrasts with Jack Twist's more open and playful energy, highlighting the tension between them. Some critics initially complained about the mumbling, but later recognized it as a stroke of genius. Ledger turned Ennis's voice into a symbol, a man so closed off he can barely speak his own desires. It made his few moments of openness. Without that carefully constructed voice, Ennis's tragedy would not feel nearly as authentic. 12. Michelle Williams and Heath Ledger fell in love on set. One of the most touching behind-the-scenes stories is that Heath Ledger and Michelle Williams, who played Ennis's wife Alma, met and fell in love during production. Director Ang Lee recalled that the chemistry between them was immediate. After filming an early family scene, the two were nearly inseparable off-screen. Within a year, they had a daughter, Matilda. This real-life romance added another layer to the film's emotional resonance. The wife, who painfully witnesses her husband's secret love, gained intensity from her closeness with Ledger. She understood his vulnerability in a way few others could. Their connection also gave their on-screen fights a rawness that went beyond acting. Tragically, their love story was cut short by Ledger's death in 2008. Fans of Brokeback Mountain often revisit the film with added sorrow, knowing that the intimacy between Alma and Ennis mirrored the actors' own bond. In queer history, the irony is profound. The movie about forbidden love also birthed a real love story, one that ended too soon but remains beloved in Hollywood memory. 13. Annie Proulx had mixed feelings about the movie's success. While audiences and critics hailed Brokeback Mountain as groundbreaking, Annie Proulx, the author of the original short story, had complicated feelings about its reception. On one hand, she praised Ang Lee and the actors for capturing the emotional essence of her work. On the other, she felt the film's popularity led to endless misinterpretations. Proulx said she was frustrated by straight audiences treating the story as just another tragic romance, rather than recognizing the specific realities of queer life it depicted. She also grew weary of fan fiction and letters from people suggesting alternate endings, some insisting that Jack survived or that Ennis could find another partner. For Proulx, the tragedy was the point. Brokeback was about how society crushes queer love. Her ambivalence reminds us that even when queer stories reach mainstream audiences, they are often misunderstood. Still, many LGBTQ+ readers and viewers remain grateful to Proulx for writing a story that pierced through decades of silence, forcing America to confront a love it preferred to ignore. Without her 30-page story, queer cinema history would look very different. 14th Ledger fought against homophobic jokes on set and beyond. Heath Ledger's commitment to authenticity didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. On set, whenever crew members made nervous jokes about the film's gay subject matter, Ledger shut them down firmly. He reportedly told colleagues that there was nothing funny about portraying two men in love, and that the story deserved the same respect as any straight romance. Ledger carried this protectiveness into public life. During awards season, when presenters or comedians attempted to crack jokes about gay cowboys, he kept his composure but never played along. He considered it offensive to trivialize Jack and Ennis's relationship. At one point, he even refused to participate in promotional stunts that he felt mocked the film's seriousness. This attitude mattered. Ledger was a rising star, admired for his intensity and integrity, and his refusal to allow homophobic humor helped normalize respect for queer roles. Many LGBTQ+ activists still cite Ledger's stance as an example of allyship. He used his platform not just to act in a groundbreaking film, but to shield it from ridicule at a time when homophobia was rampant in mainstream culture. 15. It was banned or censored in several countries. While Brokeback Mountain found success in much of the world, it wasn't universally embraced. In some countries, including several in the Middle East and parts of Asia, it was outright banned for its depiction of same-sex love. In others, censors allowed the film to be shown but cut out key scenes, particularly the love scenes between Jack and Ennis. These edits stripped the film of its authenticity, leaving only fragments of the relationship intact. For queer viewers in those countries, the censorship was devastating, a reminder that their stories were still being erased, even as the rest of the world celebrated. Yet the bans also backfired in some places, fueling underground demand. Bootleg copies circulated, and Brokeback became a secret symbol of resistance for LGBTQ+ people living under repression. The fact that a love story between two cowboys could provoke such censorship highlights the film's power. It wasn't just a Hollywood romance, it was political art. By simply showing two men in love, it rattled governments, unsettled censors, and inspired hidden networks of queer audiences across the globe. 16. Ang Lee drew from his own outsider experience. Though Ang Lee is not queer, he is often spoken about feeling like an outsider in his own life. Growing up in Taiwan, he struggled with the strict expectations of his family and society. When he moved to the US, he faced cultural displacement, never feeling fully at home in either world. That sense of alienation made him gravitate towards stories about people who live in silence, carrying emotions they cannot fully express. For Lee, Brokeback Mountain wasn't just a gay love story. It was a universal story about repression and longing. He empathized with Ennis and Jack's inability to live openly because he too had lived a life divided, split between what others expected of him and what he truly wanted. His delicate, restrained direction came from that personal understanding. He once said, "I don't know what it is like to be gay, but I know what it is like to live with secrets." That outsider empathy gave the film its aching tenderness, turning it from a niche, queer story into a masterpiece that spoke across boundaries. 17. The film inspired real-life coming-out stories. One of the most powerful legacies of Brokeback Mountain is how it touched audiences on a deeply personal level. For many queer people, especially men living in rural or conservative areas, the film felt like the first honest mirror of their own experiences. Countless viewers have shared stories of coming out to their families after watching the movie, explaining that it gave them courage to live authentically. Some parents also described having their eyes opened. Mothers and fathers who once dismissed queer relationships as a phase were devastated by the love story of Jack and Ennis, realizing for the first time how real and deep same-sex love could be. Activists have credited Brokeback with softening public attitudes toward LGBTQ+ people at a time when marriage equality was still being fiercely debated. Even now, almost 2 decades later, online forums and social media are full of testimonies from people who say, "This film changed my life." That's the extraordinary cultural weight of Brokeback Mountain. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a catalyst for real human transformation. 18. The "I wish I knew how to quit you" line became iconic and misunderstood.
"You are too much for me, Ennis. You son of a horse and bitch. I wish I knew how to quit you."
Few lines in cinema history have echoed as loudly as Jack Twist's anguished cry, "I wish I knew how to quit you." It has been quoted, parodied, and referenced endlessly since 2005. On one level, the line became shorthand for impossible love, invoked whenever someone can't let go of a destructive attachment, but in its original context, it carried a far deeper meaning. Jack wasn't simply saying he couldn't stop seeing Ennis. He was confessing that his love was so bound to his identity that it felt like an addiction, a need he couldn't escape. The pain in Gyllenhaal's delivery comes not just from frustration, but from despair. Jack knows their love is unsustainable, yet he also knows it is the only thing that makes him feel alive. Unfortunately, many comedians and pop culture outlets mocked the line, reducing it to a joke. Yet for queer audiences, it remains haunting. It articulates the cruel paradox of queer love under oppression. To love is both salvation and suffering. That one line distills the entire tragedy of Brokeback Mountain into a single, unforgettable cry. 19. The Wyoming landscape was its own character. Although filmed largely in Canada, the sweeping landscapes of Brokeback Mountain were meant to represent Wyoming, and they play a role as vital as any actor. Ang Lee and cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto treated the mountains, rivers, and open skies as reflections of the characters' emotions. When Jack and Ennis first fall in love, the vast wilderness feels liberating, a place where they can exist outside the gaze of society. The mountains cradle their passion, making them feel almost safe. But later, those same wide horizons begin to feel lonely and desolate, echoing Ennis's isolation after Jack's death. The use of nature as metaphor was deliberate. Lee explained that he wanted the audience to feel both the beauty and the indifference of the land. The mountains would keep their secret, but they would also outlast them, silent witnesses to a love erased by human prejudice. For many viewers, the film's landscapes became inseparable from its heartbreak, breathtaking and achingly empty. 20. Heath Ledger's death deepened the film's tragic legacy. When Heath Ledger died unexpectedly in 2008 at just 28 years old, the world mourned a brilliant actor gone too soon. For fans of Brokeback Mountain, his death added another layer of sorrow to an already devastating film. Many couldn't help but connect Ledger's real-life loss to Ennis Delmar's grief over Jack. He frames Elio's experience as something sacred, a gift to be cherished rather than hidden. For queer viewers, this scene lands like a miracle. Many never heard such words from their own parents. The monologue offers the kind of affirmation queer children often dream of but rarely receive. It reimagines family not as a site of repression, but of understanding. Guadagnino gives the queer audience a fantasy of support, a cinematic balm to the wounds of rejection. It is, in many ways, the emotional climax of the film. Proof that queer love deserves recognition, even within the family home. 18. Oliver's return call. After Oliver leaves, the film doesn't simply end. Instead, it takes us months later into winter, where Elio receives a phone call. Oliver announces his engagement to a woman. His voice is tender, even sorrowful, but firm. For Elio, and for the audience, the call is devastating. What's crucial here is the double coding. On the surface, Oliver has moved on into a socially acceptable heterosexual life. Yet his tone, his pauses, his choice of words all hint at lingering affection.